Yep, Einstein got that right. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Yep, insanity.
No! The USFL! Hi, everyone. Happy Easter. Happy Passover. This is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports History, welcoming you to another edition. And this week, I was really just going to go into baseball because I know all two listeners, myself and Howard included, are just waiting with bated breath as I go on and on about some of the baseball stories or cards that I wanted to feature this week, but not realizing, well, definitely realizing, but definitely forgetting about the reemergence of the United States Football League, resurrecting itself, obviously, and on the weekend of Easter to all of America is really the crux of this week's theme, because the USFL making its reappearance almost 30 years, no, actually closer to 40 years after it went down by really a lawsuit that they won in a New York court. Right after that, really the league just bottomed out because of shortages of funds, a different philosophy as opposed to what it originally wanted to be, a spring football league that would rival the NFL. Now, the USFL has come back and reemerged, and with the same teams, and I do believe under the auspices of the NFL. Well, really, the theme of the cartoon is what I'm thinking is, how many times do you have to try to bring back, like a rising phoenix? How many times you have to bring back a league that folded once and that didn't prosper? Had pretty much interesting, I won't say great ownership, but definitely interesting ownership. Actually, technically, just as good players, at least for the first couple of years, that the AFL had in its expansion years to rival the NFL, and then, of course, the merger, but never really, the USFL was never able to do that. And I really thought way back when, now this is going back, 1983 was its first season. I definitely want to show you some of the teams that were involved in this, and also my favorite logo. I'd like to take a look. These are just some of the teams. Some of them were teams that merged into other teams. Some of them just flat out moved, and some of them just disbanded. But they were, and I'm going to read it out to you. I got to get my glasses again here somewhere. They had the Arizona Outlaws, the Arizona Wranglers, the Baltimore Stars, the Birmingham Stallions, which I saw the game Saturday night, as a matter of fact, the Generals against the Stallions. Pretty good game. Yeah, it came down to the last couple of plays in the game. The Stallions coming out, pulling it out, and winning on a field goal by a ex-Notre Dame soccer player. How interesting is that, to win the first game of the brand new USFL? You had one of the best logos, I actually thought, for a football helmet, the Boston Breakers with the little seagull and all the rest of it. They became the New Orleans Breakers, and then the Portland Breakers, and then they did the El Foldo. The Chicago Blitz, which looked more like, but the Chicago Blitz, doesn't that either look like an oil can company, kind of like Mobil or something like that, or another Subway or hamburger franchise? The Chicago Blitz, try it with onions, something like that. Then you had the Denver Gold, kind of a cool logo. It looks very corporate, but it kind of worked on their football helmet as well. Then you had the Houston Gamblers, the Jacksonville Bulls. I did personally like that uniform. I thought it was kind of cool, that type of orange with the gray and the black. One of the worst helmets, the LA Express, just said LA with maybe wisps of wind showing how fast, quote unquote, the cars are going down the highway. I always thought they could have had something better. You know what they could have done? As I'm thinking about it right now, instead of having the bold stripe going down the helmet, just make that into the LA Express, and it would just be like a superhighway going down. That would have been better off. I do like this logo, the Memphis Showboats, the Michigan Panthers. Well, they did, though, win the first championship, and I will have that. I'm going to get into that. The team that has won the most all-time games in the original USFL. Of course, you had the Jersey Generals. Did like the 5 stars on their helmet. Just couldn't see it all that well with the red background. The Boston Breakers, of course, I already mentioned. I did like that logo. This one was very cartoonish, as if a 4th grader did it. Why? Because in 4th grade, I was making those kind of logos, and that's why I say that. The Oakland Invaders, of course, a play off the Raiders of Oakland, and I thought they could have been a little bit cooler. Instead of a lightning bolt with a fist. And, of course, the Outlaws, that was a pretty cool logo as well. In fact, it looked really sharp on the helmet. Then you had the Orlando Renegades. And on their helmet, they did have the tomahawk. It kind of was an allusion to the old 69 Redskin spear, which I just loved. And, of course, Florida State Seminoles still have that spear. It's a little bit more broad, a little bit more let's say, colorful and patterned than the 69 Redskin one, but that was a great one. Then you have the Philadelphia Stars. That looks like it was what you would see on the front of a discotheque of the 70s and 80s. You have the Pittsburgh Maulers with a hammer. It looks like they are working for Vulcan in the old mythology. Again, the Boston Breakers, this time not in Boston, not in New Orleans, but in Portland. The Tampa Bay Bandits, which were an interesting group. They were coached by Steve Spurrier, owned by John Bassett, who was a pretty good owner, very interesting kind of a guy. And the Washington Federals. Yes, the Washington Federals, green and blue. And, of course, it's just bolting away with, to me, that doesn't look like an eagle. That looks more like the Loch Ness Monster. And, of course, my favorite of all the logos, and I'm going to get a special. I'm going to make it bigger. My son Matt made it bigger for me. This one I just totally love and never realized that they had this logo, because I would definitely get a hoodie. As you see, each week I wear either some sort of sports hoodie. I like to have a little bit of consistency. I was wearing the suit and tie or the shirt and tie for a while there. And then I was like, you know what? I'll make it a little bit more less formal, the show. But I just love this gunslinger logo. It looks like he would belong in the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly with Lee Van Cleef and, of course, Clint Eastwood. I just love it because it does remind me of the Path cartoons of the Pink Panther way back in the late 60s and early 70s. I just love it. Plus, I guess the green and the blue plus the silver make for a unique combination of colors. Anyway, that USFL league, it did start off pretty good. In fact, I think they did open the league way back when, 1983, to pretty good ratings on ABC and ESPN. And I do believe the first big national game was the Generals playing the LA Express, and the Generals lost that game almost in similar fashion to how they lost Saturday night to the Birmingham Stallions, 24-21. I think the Generals lost 24-20. But I just want to I was going to go to Wikipedia, but I did find a great site. It is called USFLsite.com, and I think it promotes a book, A Brief History of the USFL. It's by a writer, 1982 to 1986, Paul Reeths. That's Reeths. I just found it now. It's published, I believe, by, well, I won't say the publisher because I'm probably going to be in error on that. But this book was written a few years ago and has on its cover Jim Kelly when he played for the Gamblers against the New Jersey Generals, because I do believe Kelly wound up with the Generals, and they had, of course, on their team Herschel Walker. See, what happened was this: the NFL, probably just like they are now, they know they have a monopoly on the American game of football, and they were being challenged by other NFL or other pretty much multi-millionaire owners who really wanted to get their foot in the door with happening with an NFL franchise. That seems to be the big thing. Of course, as boys grow up, they just get bigger toys. And one of the big toys that the big boys like today are owning some sort of franchise, a sports franchise in particular, whether it's in the NBA, the NFL, or of course, Major League Baseball. And now these franchises are really worth billions of dollars. So you know that the contracts via TV, the internet, this gambling, all these gambling sites have really been just a source of really milk and honey for the NFL, the Major League Baseball, the NHL to a certain extent, and of course the NBA. Just a ton of money, to the point where when you think about it, they don't even need people in the stands anymore to really make a good chunk of revenue. I mean, it's all coming from different streams of media, different streams of revenue, corporations just sponsoring different or various things in the ballpark or on the team. Pretty soon, and of course it's happening already, but you have the different corporate logos that are adorning the uniforms. And of course, eventually, how soon does it become almost like, remember Rollerball, the movie with James Caan, the original one back in 75, where it was names of corporations and you were playing for the corporations? Well, how far off are these franchises from just becoming, let's say, the New York Nikes or the Chicago, the Chicago McDonald's or the Chicago Big Macs or something like that? It's not really all that crazy. So it's kind of interesting. Anyway, the USFL, for the most part, started off, I do believe this. They thought of the concept of spring football, and I think what they were trying to do was grow an audience. But lo and behold, a couple of owners, actually, I do believe one of the pioneers towards moving towards the fall was Donald Trump. And of course, the USFL eventually sues the NFL, does win in a court of law, but instead of reaping millions from the lawsuit, because it was based on monopolies, and probably them claiming, I do believe, here was the gist of it. They claimed that the NFL had a monopoly in the fall, so they sued because it was based on antitrust, all the rest of it. And I'm not a lawyer. I'm just giving you. The jury found, that's the interesting thing. The jury did find, in the way of the USFL, but instead of awarding them millions of dollars, which they probably could have used to keep the league afloat, they awarded them only $3. So that was the end of it. Now, I would have loved to have seen this. They weren't doing they did start off well. Let's just give you a little history of the USFL. They start off, they do well in terms of just, I'm going to give you the 83 season. These are the teams that were in it that year. They actually go by week one. Actually, this is pretty good. So I'll stay here. 4 of the games were shown either on ESPN or ABC, and this is before ESPN and ABC really combined under the auspices of Disney. But the very first game was Sunday, March 6th, Boston against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay, of course, won the game 21-17. They were the Bandits over the Breakers. Then it was Chicago 28 over the Washington Federals, who were terrible. They were just a terrible team, 28-7. The Blitz actually had some players who came over from the NFL, and they did get into the playoffs that year. We'll get into that a little bit later. The LA Express defeated the Jersey Generals 20-15. I said 24-20. It was 20-15. But I do recall that the Generals, like Saturday, had a late lead and, of course, gave it up, surrendered it. They played that game, I believe, in the Coliseum in Los Angeles. The first shutout was by the Oakland Invaders over the Arizona Wranglers, 24-0. And the Philadelphia team, 13-7 over the Denver Gold. And, of course, Philadelphia, again, I want to keep calling them the Bell, but they weren't. They were called the Stars. They would have been better off being called what. When we were kids, we used to make up our own franchises, our own teams with logos and all the rest of it and play games with them. And I do remember my one brother, Ed, had a team in Philadelphia. And, of course, we named our leagues and all the rest of it. He called them the Philadelphia Bells. Now, in the old World Football League, they were called the Philadelphia Bell. I always wanted him to sue, copyright infringement and all the rest of it. But anyway, I always liked that Philadelphia Bell. And he came up with before the World Football League. That's a whole other thing. And Birmingham was defeated by Michigan 9-7. Now, of those games, 3 were on ABC: Chicago, Washington, LA against New Jersey, and Philadelphia, Denver. They were played all Sunday. They were regional, I do believe, with the exception, I'm pretty sure, that the Generals game was a national game. And, of course, ESPN hosted the Monday game, March 7th, Michigan over Birmingham. Now, here were the crowds those first weeks. Now, you're talking about Tampa Bay, all right. It's in the middle of spring training. They drew 42,000. Chicago had Washington, March in Washington. All right, maybe generally a little bit warmer. The cherry blossoms are eventually going to blossom and all the rest of it. Got 38,000 for that game. And in LA, Sunday, March 6th, when most people would probably be outside walking around and all the rest of it, they got 34,000 for that game. In addition, Denver at Mile High Stadium, in technically still winter, they drew 45,000 people for a game against Philadelphia. And they did play this game in Birmingham, 38,000 to watch Michigan defeat Birmingham 9-7. My whole point is this. The USFL kind of proved. Now, it's not January and it's not February, but it's still the winter. And we know how brutal some Marches can be, even April's. As I'm going to tape this show, I mean, it went from a very brisk morning to now it's overcast and it feels like it could snow. And here it is, April 18th, and it could snow in some parts of the nation. And of course, that's just the fickleness of early spring. I know we're a month in, but I think everyone knows what I'm talking about at home. March and April are are 2 months where the weather is very fickle. One day it could be 70 degrees, the next it plummets to 33 degrees, and you're bringing back your winter clothes again. And I coached for a while. Well, I call it coaching. I was just on the sidelines. Probably the 4 worst springs in the last 15 years occurred from 2017 to 2020. It was cold. It was always raining, but we did have, even when we were doing lacrosse practices, there was flurries in the air. And I'm talking about April, and I'm talking about the middle of April. So we know how cold it can be. My whole point is this. They got 45,000 to the first week in March in Denver. So it really wasn't out of the realm of the NFL playing that Super Bowl years ago in Giants or in the Meadowlands. Even though the next day we did have that blizzard. It was kind of cool. But it can be done. And if you can get 45,000 for a brand new league, why couldn't you draw another 80,000? And I'm telling you, you could probably get a Super Bowl in Lambeau. It'll never happen. But it would be kind of cool, and no pun intended, to have a Super Bowl really being waged in those kind of elements. Now, I don't want to be there. I'll watch from the comfort of my man cave on my leather couch with my refrigerator on my right-hand side and my restroom to the left, and there's no line in either going out either door. And my ticket welcomes me into a room where if I want to grab a blanket, I can. If I want to turn off and watch something else, I can. I get all that. There is a thrill of being at the game. I guess I'm just too old for it now. I just enjoy watching it at home. But anyway, that first year, it was pretty good, I would have to say. And I do remember watching the playoff game. The championship was on a Sunday night. It got 50,000 to the game at Denver. And it was played by Michigan and Philadelphia. And at that point, if you recall, 1983, the Super Bowl that year, Washington and Oakland, or they were in LA at that point, that was a blowout. This game was back and forth. And I am going to bring a couple of guys. Here's Herschel making the cover. Remember, he left early from Georgia. I think he felt it was always a mistake that he did leave. Let me tell you something. Walker was a great college player. And statistically, in the NFL, he was productive. His problem was he always managed to play with mediocre, not great teams. And I was looking at his first year with Philadelphia, with the New Jersey Generals. Do you know that he was responsible for 2,301 yards of offense between pass catches and running the ball? He ran for 1,800 yards, basically 100 yards a game, because I do believe they played 18 games that year. And basically another 500 yards through the air. So you're talking about a guy who picked up or is responsible for 130 yards of play. Now, this is back in 83 when, it was the era of still run first and very few teams passed first. It was run first, pass second. Now it's really past 90% of the times. They've realized with the metrics, it's something, and I'm not bragging about this, but I will tell you this. It was something I realized years ago. If you're gaining 7-8 yards on a pass completion, even if you're only on a pass completion, even if you're only at 33%, or even at 50%, if you realize you're still getting 16 yards every 4 downs. So you're getting a first down. Whereas the best running back in the game, Jimmy Brown, averaged only 5.2 average yards. All right. My whole point is, if you're talking about metrics and stuff, it's easier to get yards through the air, obviously. And that's what the NFL has realized over the last, I would say, 20 years. And of course, they've made it easier by making it more offensive happy, more pass happy. Anyway, he signed on, I do believe, in February. And in fact, this is actually March that he made the cover of the Sports Illustrated. And he was just a great player in college. He won the Heisman in the wrong year. He shouldn't have won it the year that he did. I think he won it his junior year. Probably should have won it his freshman year. And I've gone on about his freshman year when he led the Dogs to their first championship, 1980, that I ever saw. And he ran for 150 yards and didn't get any help at all, a completed pass at all in that game until late in the fourth quarter by Buck Bellew. And in that very first quarter against Notre Dame, he suffered a separated shoulder, and Notre Dame knew it and continued, justifiably so. They pummeled him in that game. When I tell you that he ran for 150 yards, oh man, it was just unbelievable what he was able to do. And that was the only offense Georgia really had. They win the game 17-10 and win a championship over Notre Dame that probably should have won the game. And we'll talk about that another day. But anyway, here's Walker with those nice, they are pretty nice uniforms. Simple. And as you can see down here, I do like the General logo, of course, the 5-star General, but you really can't see it. Probably what they should have done was had either a lighter red or a white helmet with probably red, white, and blue panel striping coming down the middle of the helmet. But what do I know? It could have mirrored his knickers, the pants that he's wearing. Yes, they're called knickers. 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 I love that name. And of course, it's the New York Knicks. Anyway, down here is a card, Topps card from the championship game, 24-22. That's Bobby Hebert. And actually, you know what's funny about this? If you take a look at that helmet, I just saw it now. Look at how the Panther logo, don't look at the Panther itself. Look around the Panther, and it mirrors the Michigan Wolverine helmet. If you can see that, look at that. Now, here's the Panther logo in dark. But if you look the opposite way, it looks like the Michigan Wolverine helmet. That's ingenious. And I'm sure that they did that on purpose. But and it was a good game. Bobby Hebert, who would go on to play in the NFL with the, here's another one because I do want to show you this. He would play with the New Orleans Saints and get them into the playoffs, I do believe. Anthony Carter, who, of course, I'm a Notre Dame fan, and Michigan, of course, has long been a rival. If you're a Notre Dame fan, you don't like anybody from the Big Ten. You may root for occasionally Purdue, because as a kid, it seemed like they were the only ones that wanted to play Notre Dame besides Northwestern, but that wasn't even a game way back when. I'm sorry, I'm not knocking Northwestern, but they just didn't have a good football program after Era left and then joined the Irish. But anyway, one thing I loved about Anthony Carter, and of course the NFL poo-pooed this, was he was very thin but extremely fast. And he wore his socks real high. And it used to be that they were striping or stirrups, what they used to call stirrups, what the baseball players wear. They used to wear the stirrups underneath, and then they wear the sanitaries on top. Well, he would take his white sanitaries and meet them at the end of his football pants, and then he would tape his shoes, and they actually looked like a horse's hoof, the way that he did it with his shoe. And then he had these long, very thin, spindly legs. But, man, they generated a ton of speed, and he had good hands. He was a good receiver. His problem was, really, I think he may have been, if he was drenched with water, maybe 165 pounds. And probably if you stretched him, he might have been 5'10". I think he was about more 5'8", 5'9". But he had blazing speed, and he was a productive player. He does go on and play for the Minnesota Vikings, but never what you would say a superstar at all. But when he was playing for the Panthers, and he does go to the University of Michigan, the Michigan Wolverines, and he had a great season that first year. And I do believe this might be the winning touchdown catch in that game that puts Michigan out in front to stay, because I think Philadelphia had a late lead. I was rooting for Philly, and they had a late lead in the game, and Hebert hooked up with Anthony Carter for a touchdown. I don't know who the cornerback is on the play, but look at what he's doing there. They would crush it today in the NFL because he's lifting the ball. Had he dropped it, I don't believe at this angle, I could be wrong, that football would have been lost. It was not over the goal line. So this is a great photograph. And you can see how the game in those 40 some odd years has really changed that way. Today, the guy would either be, really, when you think about it, many of the guys dive over to really secure the touchdown, or they hold the ball forward so they would break the plane. All right, now, here's two players. I'll save these two. A couple of players that would go on to NFL stardom. Not just NFL stardom, but the Hall of Fame status. I'm pretty sure Steve Young is in the Hall of Fame. But Steve Young, of course, would play for the LA Express. He signed a mega deal with the LA Express. And unfortunately for Young, man, boy, did he suffer from a lot of concussions in his football career. I don't know whether he had as many at BYU. I know he did have a couple there, but boy, oh boy, it seemed like he was always getting one concussion a year when he was playing for the 49ers. And with the LA Express, he wasn't really on a good team, but he was a named player. When he came out of college, he was a big-time player, guys. Then he waited for Montana, and then when he got his shot, he does win a Super Bowl, beating the San Diego Chargers in one of the highest scoring games, if not the highest scoring game in Super Bowl history. But he was I always equated him to a lefty Roger Staubach. Probably had better arm strength than Staubach. And let's face it, I'm not trying to be using those terms. He had a very strong arm, but Staubach did too. But I would say that probably he reminded me more of Staubach than he does of Stabler. And of course, anybody who saw Ken Stabler and Staubach play, you know what I mean. They were more scramblers. They definitely had where Stabler scrambled and got out of the pocket and would run for yardage. He did it really out of fear. I really do believe that Young and Staubach, it was definitely part of their game. It was their style of quarterbacking. It made them both exciting. And I always equated Steve Young as a person looking in the mirror, and you're looking at Roger Staubach, only from the reverse side. He was a really good football player. And he was great in college. He was a great college football player as well. He was really one of the guys who is, for Lavelle Edwards, the pioneer, one of the true, I shouldn't say he was the first of the big-time throwing machines at BYU, because they had Virgil Carter, they had Mark Wilson, they had Steve Young, of course, they had the Chicago quarterback, they had Robbie Bosco, Jim McMahon, couldn't think of it, who, I got to be honest with you, of the quarterbacks I saw at BYU, probably Young was probably the best of them all. And I would put McMahon behind it, but McMahon was a great college quarterback at BYU. He was exciting, just like Young was. But Steve Young, yeah, he didn't have the same success with the LA Express as he would later on with the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, anybody who can lead their team to a Super Bowl would say, okay, I think you had more success in the NFL. And of course, Reggie White played for the Memphis Showboats. I also think, though, he played for Philadelphia. And of course, then he signs with the Eagles. And I think that was one of the reasons why he does sign with the Eagles when he comes into the league. And then, of course, really gets his Hall of Fame numbers up there and his acclaim by playing for the Green Bay Packers. But he was a dominating player. I love the Showboats. This is their helmet. Very similar to what the UNLV Rebels look like. Probably they borrowed their uniform look after the UNLV Rebels, because they have that red with the gray and with the striping and all the rest of it. I do love that Showboat logo. I was trying to download a picture from, I think, their media guide. It's all the players and coaching staff on a riverboat. It looked pretty cool. And it is why I like the Showboat one. It's a unique name. I'm not saying the LA Express isn't a unique name, but again, LA Express, let's face it, that sounds like a coffee and donut shop that you go to in the morning, kind of like a 7-Eleven. Nothing against those franchises. It just doesn't sound like a football team's nickname. And of course, here's a guy that ESPN did an article about. I remember him in college, Marcus Dupree's from Mississippi. And he went to Oklahoma, left early, of course, to sign with the USFL. He was a kid that was very similar to Billy Sims, who also played for Oklahoma. Sims, of course, played for the Detroit Lions, and the problem with Billy Sims was the fact that he played for mediocre. Well, when haven't the Lions been mediocre in my lifetime? But he played for a very mediocre Lions outfit and hurt his knee and was really never the same. Dupree is very similar. But when I tell you that Dupree could have had a great NFL career, and I'm not talking about woulda, shoulda, coulda. I really mean that this guy was strong. And what the scouts like to say, he ran close to the ground, so he was tough because he had a low center of gravity. He was just tough to tackle. He was just built. He was strong. He was fast. Never dropped the football when I remember him. Just a really great football player. And in college, he was just tremendous with Oklahoma. And it's a shame that he didn't really have an NFL career. Injuries again, was just the mainstay, the biggest problem, staying healthy. And that is really, when they talk about the average NFL career being less than 4 years, about 3 years, it's kind of scary. And that many of these players get hurt, not really in a football game, but in crazy situations. I remember when Garrison Hurst got hurt, wrecked his career playing in that all-star flag football competition. It was really a shame. All right. Now, here was probably one of the big controversies that I remember with the USFL among players. And that was that Jim Kelly played with the Gamblers. And I do like the Gambler helmet. I wish they had now that I'm thinking about it, I wish the Gamblers had the logo for the Evansville Purple Aces is one of the finest in all of college basketball. It's really a picture of a riverboat man with an ace, because they're called the Purple Aces. He's wearing a top hat. He's in that typical riverboat outfit, striping. Think of the James Gardner show. And he's got the black vest, and of course the little pistol and all the rest of it. But that's how I always wanted the purple, the Gamblers to have as a logo, similar to the San Antonio with an actual figure, a cartoonist figure, and he could be, just a gambler throwing a football or catching it. Gamblers. But this is a good logo for the helmet. If you can see that, I'm going to move that in a little bit. It is the letter G, and of course, in the G is the outline of the state of Texas, which was really good. Now, make a long story short, Jim Kelly actually there's controversy. I think Trump does sign or engineers a transaction, a move to get Jim Kelly in the same backfield as Herschel Walker. The problem was that the Generals had Doug Flutie. He's a guy. Do you realize everybody makes fun of Doug Flutie? I loved him. He's still my favorite college football player of all time. I always thought that he didn't get a perfect chance. Got numerous opportunities in the NFL with Buffalo, Chicago, and New England. It just never materialized. But do you realize that Flutie, for all of his mediocrity, he lasted about 20 years? That's incredible. Anyway, so there was some controversy. I stopped rooting actually for the Generals when they got Jim Kelly because I was mad that Flutie was taken off the starting position. And I don't know whether Flutie eventually goes to the CFL where he won. He played up there like 6 years, Flutie. I should do a whole show on Flutie. He won like 3 MVPs with the Calgary Stampeders. He was amazing up there. The CFL was really built for Doug Flutie. He was a great player up there. Do you realize he played in the USFL, the Canadian Football League, and the NFL, Doug Flutie? And now, of course, he does the broadcasting. He's had a pretty fulfilling career. One that, everyone, they probably criticize his abilities, but how does a guy last for 20 years in the pro ranks? I don't care whether it's in the CFL, the USFL, you're being paid to play. And he was able to last 20 years. And then I think of guys who are the can't misses like Johnny Manziel, and they can't find a spot now. And there's reasons why, obviously. But I'm thinking of Johnny Manziel or Griffin, who won the Heisman Trophy when he was at Baylor. And, of course, he got hurt. I get all that. But for a guy who is seen as little, 5'9", not big, 165, 175 pounds, he lasted 22 years. He avoided injuries. How did he do that? He did a pretty good job of surviving and being a decent, maybe not great quarterback. Like I said, I would love to have seen if they just said, Doug, we got a great offensive coordinator. We're just going to use your skills and talents, and let's just see what happens. Because when he was given an opportunity, he won a number of championships, Grey Cups in the CFL. But that was one of the big controversies in the old USFL. Now, as I said, Michigan wins. I do believe Philadelphia wins. Now, the big winners total were who won all time. I do believe Birmingham was one of the all-time winners. The worst team probably in franchise history, in the history of the UFSF, the United States Football League, was without a doubt the Washington Federals. Let me just get this real quick. The Birmingham Stallions, though, I don't believe they won a championship, but they do win 36 games. And I think there's only one other team that won more, 41. And I think it either might be Tampa Bay, Michigan, or Philadelphia. Anyway, a look back at the old USFL and, of course, my favorite logo, the Gunslingers of San Antonio. This is Will O'Toole. Thank Howard for all your patience with producing this show. I really appreciate it. But anyway, thanks, everyone. I'll see you next week with another Park Ridge Sports History episode. Thank you for joining me again.